Okay, so I have here this guitar speaker, and I want to go ahead and test to make sure everything is working on it before I install it in a cabinet. So I need some way in order to hook this up to a guitar amp to make sure that this speaker works. Okay, so this is a pretty simple project. There isn't really a lot to it. All I need is one of these solderless terminal assortment kits. I picked this up at Harbor Freight. They're pretty cheap. And there's a whole bunch of different kind of connectors in here. But we have some of these female disconnects, and we just need to find the ones that are the right size to fit on our speaker terminals. Then I just need something to plug it into the amp with, so I have here a 1/4 inch jack, and then I need some kind of wire in order to hook it up with. Now, to hook up this speaker, you might be tempted to just pick out an old 1/4 inch guitar cable that you have lying around and snip off one end and put on some connectors to attach to your speaker, but it's not really a good idea because inside a normal instrument cable, the gauge of wire is very small. And since we're dealing with the output from the amplifier and a pretty high current going to our speaker, we want to use a little bit more substantial wire. So I recommend any sort of wire gauge in the teens, really. I feel like 14, 16, 18 are all pretty much fine. And that's especially true for this 20-watt speaker here by itself. So I have just some old garbage lamp cord. I think this came off of the light fixture in our dining room when I installed it. It's just an extra length that we had to cut off when we trimmed up the chandelier. It's just 16 gauge wire. This is going to be perfect for this. Okay, so now of course, rather than just using some garbage lamp wire, you could use dedicated speaker wire. But speaker wire usually comes in two different variants, either pure copper or copper-cladded aluminum. So we can see here on this speaker wire that if I just take a knife and start scraping at the wires, they change from copper color to a more of silver color. And that's because this is just aluminum wire that has a copper coating on it. So this is the cheaper kind of speaker wire. You can see with my free lamp cord, if I just start scraping on this, it stays that copper color because it's copper all the way through and there's no aluminum in there. So even though I don't know the purity of this wire, it is genuine copper and not just copper-cladded aluminum. So I would say this is the better option to use than this cheaper speaker cable. All right, so I'm just going to strip the insulation off of this wire. This happens to be 16 gauge wire. So I can just go ahead and slip this connector on and then crimp it tight with the pliers here. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I put on the connectors in the appropriate order. Alright, so now that we got that all soldered together, we can go ahead and plier down this strain relief and then put the whole thing together. Okay, so now for a little tester cable like this, where you're only hooking up one speaker, the polarity really doesn't matter. But just to make sure we have the polarity right on this, I'm going to check which one of these is the ground of this 1/4 inch. And that's going to be this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and put a piece of black heat shrink on this one to tell me it's the negative, and a piece of red on this one to tell me it's the positive. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is hook this speaker up to an amplifier with a speaker out. I have here this Marshall practice amp that I actually added a speaker out to. So if you want to see how I did that, check out the video. So not only is this useful for testing to make sure a speaker works before you install it into a cabinet, it also comes in handy when you are working on a tube amp and you want to make sure you don't turn those on with no load on them. So you want to have a speaker hooked up to them. So if you just want some speaker hooked up that you don't really care about just to put load on the amplifier, this is a great cable in order to do that with.